Good afternoon. Thank you for that introduction, Chris. Hey, a couple things here. First, I'm going to talk about reinvention here in a second, but I grabbed the program from yesterday's game. The game didn't go so well, but you see what these guys have on here? Big time backfield. It's good to see that the fashion statement has not changed here at Penn State. So reinvention. I've had the, extremely good fortune to be a student athlete here at Penn State, played on some pretty good football teams. Of course, football is a team game. My father and I certainly can't claim that we single-handedly won all those games, but we got lucky and we got to play for some good teams. And the 45-0-1, the one tie, for the record, that was my father. 1967 Gator Bowl against Florida State. But we'll take the 45-0-1. Oops. So before I get into reinventing, I will share with you the secret game plan that was supposed to be used to beat Illinois yesterday. No, seriously. So the X's and O's here. When people think about football, they think about coaches getting a bunch of young guys together and drilling them on the X's and O's. Here's what you have to do to go out there and win the game. In fact, our organization at HP is a global organization. We had a meeting a couple weeks ago. We're going through a lot of change at HP. That we just are finishing the largest technology merger ever when HP acquired Electronic Data Systems. So we still have a lot of change going on. And so one of the more vocal members of our team, who happens to be a Michigan fan, by the way, spoke up in one of the meetings. He said, look, there's a lot of stuff going on here. We've got to get the basic blocking and tackling right before we can move forward and be successful here. Basic blocking and tackling, i.e., we got to get this stuff right. So I got that immediately. I looked down the other end of the table. My colleague from Brazil was sitting there saying, what are you talking about? So I had to explain to him that means we got to get the basics right. And that's certainly true. So whenever you're engaged in challenging times, big changes, if you take one thing away from the time I have to share with you, remember, you got to get those basics right before you can succeed. So let's talk about what that has meant here at Penn State. So this is a picture from, actually, before 1960. If you look it up, it says, time unknown. But we know this was before 1960, because in 1960, the old Beaver Field moved to the current site of Beaver Stadium. And so this is really the field Penn State began to rise to the top playing on, began to beat teams that no one thought they could beat. And all of a sudden, this tradition started to take shape. But, Penn State would not be where it is today in college football unless they realized that what it took to get them to the top would be different from what it would take, back me up, to keep you there. Let me try that again. So what it took to get you to the top won't keep you there. And so we rose from a 27,000 seat stadium to now what many call the greatest show in college football, now Beaver Stadium. But amidst all that change, some things have stayed the same. I shared with you the fashion statement stayed the same. We've gone through a cycle where we used to be unanimously voted as the team with the ugliest uniforms in the sport every year. I don't know if you guys watched earlier this year, there was a game between Boise State and Virginia Tech where the ESPN commentator said, what happened? It looks like they vomited on each other. I've never missed those Penn State uniforms so much, right? So we've been one of those crowds that has really, I think, done a good job of sticking to our knitting and trying to do well based on some core principles. Let's put that into some broader context here. So reinvention, what took to get you to the top won't be the same thing that keeps you there. Well, consider this. Byte magazine. I came across this Byte magazine back in 1991, and I held on to it for reasons that I can't explain, but it's always been there where I could grab it. And as I reflect on it over the years, there's some interesting things. Well, look at this. 1991, tomorrow's laptops. Gee, that looks very familiar, doesn't it? Reminds me of some kind of fruit. But look what else was going on at that time. Remember these guys, Gateway 2000? I guess that magazine's from 1991. I guess they had like a 9-year plan. That's all they were going to do. When I was here at Penn State, if you walked into a computer lab, you'd either come across a room full of Macs, or you'd come across a room full of, Gateway 2000 computers. These guys were riding the wave. You'd buy one, the big box, it looked like you bought a cow, would show up with the black and white spots there. And look at some of their standard features. This was their bread and butter. Microsoft Windows and a mouse. 30-day money-back guarantee. Oh, look at the bottom. Free bulletin board technical support. The internet was still some deep, dark secret to the most of us, and so, man, you got free bulletin board technical support. But now let's take a look at one of their most popular models. A 25 megahertz 486 VGA, 8 megabytes of RAM. And this was the power user selection here, right? Now power users are buying, 1,000 times more RAM than that, right? And how much do you think they sold it for? $3,995. Now this brick I dropped up here, this is a current HP ProLiant Generation 6 workstation blade. Sells for about that price if you can get in touch with the right person. You can put up to 196 gigabytes of RAM in this thing. Times have changed. So why didn't Gateway stay on top? Could be lots of reasons, but I submit to you this. They just did not get lucky. They got unlucky. I talked about that crazy record me and my father had. I said it was luck. Well, it kind of was, if you think about it a certain way, because in order to successfully reinvent, you have to really get lucky. But what do we mean by luck? So I've always defined luck as when preparation meets opportunities. Credit goes to Seneca the Younger, ancient philosopher, with that quote. But it's really true. When preparation meets opportunity. So companies that have been able to see change coming, be prepared for it, have been able to be successful. So I'll ask you and all the teams you work for and with, are you and your organization really willing to prepare? Or, as we saw earlier, do you reach out and eat the marshmallow? Right? When I think about how fortunate I was, two big decisions really played into why I was lucky enough to be around here in 1994 when we probably had one of the greatest teams, not only Penn State history, but some would argue college football history. First was back in high school when as an 11th grader, my birthday's in August, so I was always about a year younger than most kids in my class that I went to school with, played sports with. And although I was doing well in school, a friend of mine offered to my dad the opportunity, said, hey, I heard about this prep school away from home, but if your son would go there, he'd get a chance to catch up on that year and probably give himself a better chance to compete. Now, I don't know about you. When I talk to kids today and I tell them that story, hey, I was in 11th grade, I was doing well, and I went and did 11th grade again. They say, are you crazy? Right? Then came here to Penn State, didn't play my first year. Again, I've talked to players and say, oh man, you waited a whole year to play? Yeah. But had I not made those decisions, I would have missed out on some interesting stuff. Have you drawn your blue line? Right? This is a concept that me and my dad came up with because we reflected on what Joe Paterno makes his teams do. If you ever have heard about the practice facility we have here at Penn State, when you go walk out on the field, you cross a blue line. And his message there is when you cross that blue line, you've got to be focused, dialed in, block out all distractions, and be ready to get better every day at what you're trying to get better at. Oops. How will you react when something goes wrong? Many boxers will tell you that, hey, the famous saying is, every boxer has a great game plan until he gets hit, meaning everyone has a good idea of what they want to do until they get smacked in the face. And then you revert to what is at your core, right? So I'll challenge you to say, whenever you're working to get better at something, don't just focus on having the best plan. Really focus on building up that core so that you're prepared to respond when adversity hits. And finally, when you say team, do you really mean it? You know, when I talk to groups, when I talk to educators, and I practice this in my workplace, we talk about teams. When I come interview great kids here at Penn State, they like to tell me about how much they've got to do teamwork. Well, in the workplace especially, I talk to managers and I say, look, we talk about team, but what happens at the end of every year? We look at an individual's numbers, we look at what an individual produced, we drag them into their own separate room and we say, you get this rating. And then we expect to send them back out and have them be focused on being team players. So with that, I'll close and say, think about reinvention. It's necessary if you want to survive, but as you go through it, remember, understand what your core is, and if you say team, mean it. Thank you.